made a small mistake, but didn't expect my husband to take such a revenge. It wasn't supposed to be something serious, it was just for thrill. But now it's one of my biggest regrets. People have read it. Have you ever made a mistake like this? How do you deal with the consequences of it? I know I fucked up big time and it kills me, but I don't know what else to do. My husband, age 45, and I, age 40, have been married for 7 years. We have a son, age 5. My husband and I met when one of our mutual friends set us up. We both were not looking for something serious at that point of time and were just having fun. However, we formed a connection and got together exclusively. We got married after dating for 2 years. My husband is a software engineer at Google. I work in the sales department of an insurance company. Our family life was going well. We had everything until I fucked it all up. It all started 5 months ago. My husband had gotten a promotion at work. He had to work extra hours after that. Whenever he came back home, he was always tired. We stopped getting intimate with each other. Every time I tried to initiate something, he would just shrug off saying he's tired or some other excuse. His behavior was irritating me. To not be affected by his behavior, I started focusing on work. There was a client my company wanted to sign, and I was trying my level best to get him to sign with our company. My promotion depended on this client. His name is Jay, and he is 48 years old. Jay had some small fintech company, and if he got the corporate health insurance from our company, it would have been a huge-ass deal for us. I was responsible for getting in contact with Jay and explaining to him everything he needed to know. My boss had told me that I should not leave any stone unturned and do everything required to get Jay's company with us. I understood his desperation. The insurance market was going really low at this point, and we needed all the clients we could to sustain us in the industry. My boss had also told me that instead of getting all professional, I should be friendly with Jay. That way we can earn his trust, he had told me. I did what I was told and stopped being very professional and rigid with Jay. I tried to not get frustrated with my husband's behavior, but it was easier said than done. The same thing would happen again over and again. I got so mad that I asked him straight up one day, "What's going on?" I asked if he's not attracted to me anymore or if there's someone else. He told me it's nothing like that and that I was getting mad over nothing. "It's just the stress from work," he had said. I believed him and didn't initiate anything in the bedroom after that. I started putting all my focus on work. Our son had gone for the summer camp, so I didn't feel like going home after work. Earlier, whenever our son wasn't at home and we would get time alone, it would be our time filled with passion and intimacy, and now it was just lonely. We didn't even talk. Forget about getting intimate. My meetings with Jay were going well. He was a funny dude. Good looking too. There are a lot of formalities and procedures about corporate health insurance, so we used to meet to discuss all that over meals. I tried to maintain a balance between professional and friendly with him, but failed real bad at that. Whenever I was having lunch or coffee with Jay, he would say something which sounded like flirting, but it used to be like in a very subtle way, but then I used to shrug it off. I knew he was single, but I thought that he was just being friendly, and I was taking it in the wrong sense. One day, over lunch, I spilled the water on my top by mistake, and I noticed Jay's eyes lingering on my cleavage. I quickly started talking about work or something, and then he started looking at my face. I really enjoyed the way he looked at me. It made me feel so good. It was probably because I wasn't getting any attention from my husband at home. I knew it was wrong to enjoy other men's attention when I'm married, but my husband wasn't interested in me anymore. I was frustrated from all the times he had rejected my approach in bed. It had a bad impact on my self-esteem as well. Due to work, I had actually become sort of friends with Jay. He started taking me out for meals which were not related to work at all. I didn't mind it. I welcomed the distraction, in fact. My attraction to him couldn't be denied. I didn't mean for it to become anything. It was just a distraction from the awkward situation at home. My husband had started to spend most of his time in his office. By the time he was home, I used to be done with my dinner. He would have his dinner and then go to sleep. The home was merely like a hotel from him now. Since I had stopped taking any initiative towards him, he had also not made any move. And from the way he acted, I knew he wasn't going to make any move in the near future. I know it was wrong and I shouldn't have done that, but I couldn't control myself. When Jay took me out for lunch one day, I started rubbing my foot on his legs. The interest in his eyes was clear. I was tired of being neglected by my own husband. That night, I did what I shouldn't have done. I slept with Jay. I went to his home with him. The frustration of all the days made me do something I never had thought I would have done. I left for my home in the middle of the night while Jay was still sleeping. I didn't know what to say to him. As I got into my car, I saw I had 2 missed calls from my husband. I hoped to God that he had slept by the time I reached home. I didn't want to face him. When I reached home, I saw my husband was fast asleep. I felt a bit relieved and then went to take a shower. The next morning, when my husband asked me where I was last night, I just told him that I had some work meeting which ran late. He didn't even pay much attention to it and continued eating his toast. I felt guilty for lying to him, but his lack of interest in me was still bothering me. I had decided that I won't see Jay anymore. The contract with him was almost complete, so I won't have to face him much due to work, and I made a decision that it was just a one-night thing. I had a husband and a son. I couldn't be reckless like this. With this decision, I went to the office and tried to block the whole world out. My husband's different behavior had affected me a lot, and he didn't even have a clue. I focused on my work for the whole week. I spent my evenings at my desk because I knew no one was waiting for me at home like earlier. My son was still at the summer camp and wouldn't be back for another month. I tried to talk to him during the week, but he was always so busy with his activities that he didn't even have time to talk to me properly. At least he was having fun. Jay didn't contact me after that night. I sort of expected it. Even though I had decided that it was a one-night thing, it still felt weird that he didn't try to even call me once. I was leaving my office on Friday when I saw Jay waiting for me outside my office. To say I was surprised to see him would be an understatement. He came up to me and hugged me. He told me that he missed me. I was both shocked and surprised. I told him that we cannot repeat what happened that night. It was a mistake. Jay looked hurt with my words. I tried to let him go, but he didn't let me. He told me that he didn't believe me and that it was not a mistake. "You cannot deny the attraction between us," were his exact words. I'll be honest with you all. The moment he said this, my decision that it was only a night one thing broke. I wanted to kiss him again, and so I did. He took me to his car in the parking lot, and we got intimated with each other. I had never been intimate with anyone like this in a car. It was a new feeling, and I loved it. I told him that I'll call him later and then went to my car and drove home. I went to shower straight away. When my husband came home and went to sleep without even kissing me once, I decided that I was going to see Jay again. That night I thought that maybe what I'm doing is selfish and wrong, but at least I didn't feel neglected with him. I knew that what I was doing was wrong and I'll have to suffer the consequences eventually. But a small voice inside me said, "Fuck the consequence." And that's how my affair with Jay started. He knew that I had a husband and a child, and he was completely fine with it. I told him that we had to stay really low-key and couldn't be seen in public places together. Jay resonated that we used to hang out together earlier as well, so we can just hang out like colleagues and friends. I agreed to that. Everything was going well. I didn't have to hide much or think about lies because my husband didn't really care much to ask. He used to just mention that I was home late or he couldn't reach me, but whatever vague reply I gave him sufficed. He never made an effort to know more. Even though it should be relieving that my husband wasn't suspicious, it felt bad as well. My husband wasn't suspicious, not because he trusted me, but because he didn't care to be bothered. I used to meet Jay in his home, or he would pick me after work if he was free. We used to meet for lunches and dinner as well. Sometimes we would get intimate in the car or in the elevator when there were no cameras. I had never thought that an affair with my client would be this thrilling, but it was. I had never thought I would get this feeling of adrenaline rush. I was so used to doing things in the bedroom that the thrill of getting intimate in public places and in cars felt too good to pass on. Being with Jay made me realize that I was missing out on a lot. I was finally finding the fun and thrill with Jay that I should have found with my husband. But beggars can't be choosers, so I took what I got and enjoyed it too. My son returned from his summer camp after 2 months. I had to adapt back according to his schedule as well. I got less time with Jay in the initial days, but then I tried to set things up in a way which would give us a lot of time together. There was no end goal of my affair with Jay. I didn't know how to navigate it. When I shared this with Jay, he calmed me down and told me that we don't have to think too far and that we can deal with one day at a time. It felt good to be assured like that. My husband had never assured me like that. mostly because he didn't have time from work. If I was honest, I couldn't blame everything on his promotion. Even without his promotion, he was always occupied with work. I was the one responsible for everything related to our home or our son when it was his responsibility as well. His promotion just pushed things to an end. Earlier, he would give me some time on the weekend or after dinner, but now that was over. It stopped bothering me after I started things with Jay. I was getting the attention in the bedroom and outside as well. Day by day, I was getting less and less affected by my husband's actions. It was clear that my husband didn't really care about me. I just refused to see earlier. He had not once tried to get intimate with me, not that I wanted it now, but still. It showed his lack of interest in me. I thought of getting separated from him for good, but I put the thoughts aside for our son. Even though my husband was a shitty husband, I know I was a shitty wife as well. He was a good father. He made sure that our son got everything he wanted, including his attention. It was a rare time where my husband would put the work aside. Every one of the times happened to be involved with our son. I couldn't separate my son from his father. I didn't want to be separated from my baby too. Joint custody was out of the box because I didn't want my son to shift from one parent to another. I decided to stay in marriage because of my kid. My love for my husband started vanishing soon. Only my son mattered to me in that house. I was finally happy after a long time. My work was going great. Things with Jay were going amazing as well. Things at home were the best they could be given the scenario. My husband continued to stay with his work. He would have not even noticed if I disappeared from his life. I used to spend my lunchtime with Jay so that I could head straight home after work to my son. Jay understood my situation and adjusted our meetings to whatever was convenient for me the best. He was so understanding about everything, it was insane. I thought everything was going according to what I had planned, but turned out that I was completely wrong. Everything had taken a quick and unexpected turn for the worst. One day, my phone fell down the stairs when I was leaving for lunch with Jay. I thought of getting it fixed later as I couldn't wait for longer to meet Jay. Jay asked me to go to his home with him. It was a Friday, so I was able to easily ditch the rest of the workday. I went to his home with him. I went home around 6, which was the same time I usually went home after work. My son wasn't at home like he was supposed to be. Only Beth was there. Beth was the nanny we had hired to be there with him after he came back from school till me or my husband got home. Beth told me that my son had gotten a high fever in school and had to be rushed to the hospital. His teacher had called me many times but couldn't get through. My husband picked up the call and was there with him in the hospital. I rushed to the hospital. It was because of my stupid phone that my son was without me in that hospital. I saw my husband sitting with our son while our son was sharing some story about his school. I rushed to my son's side immediately. He was feeling better then. My husband didn't ask me anything then. Soon, the doctor joined us and told us that my son had caught some flu and was fine to go home now. I took our son in my car to home while my husband said that he needed to get to the office as he left his work in a hurry to get here. I went home and put our son to sleep after feeding him. I made a mental note to get my phone fixed the next day itself. I went to sleep in my son's room that night. I got up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. to find my husband standing by the door. He was staring at me. I got scared at first, but then realized it's just him and released a breath of relief. I saw that he was still in his work clothes and asked when he got home. He told me that he was just getting home and wanted to check on our son before going to sleep. I nodded to him. He then asked me where I was when the teacher had called. I told him that my phone broke down and that's why they were not able to reach me. He gave me a look like he didn't believe me. I pointed to my phone that was kept on the nearby shelf. Its broken screen was visible. He then told me that he knew I wasn't in the office. I called your office, but they told me that you had left for lunch and didn't come back, he told me. I was not surprised that he had called my office. It was sort of obvious. But I was so caught up with my son that I didn't think what to tell him. I just blurted about going to a meeting which ran late. He didn't give me any expression to tell me if he believed me or not. I hoped that he believed it, and then went back to take care of my son. The next day, I didn't go to the office to stay at home with my son, but I needed to get my phone fixed, so I left for a little while Beth was there with my son. I got a new phone as my phone would have taken too much time to get fixed. The first person I contacted was Jay and told him everything. He was very understanding like always and said he was there for me. My husband didn't talk to me about anything after he asked me where I was. He just got ready and then left for the office in the morning. Everything went fine for the next few days. My son had gotten better and had started going to school again. I had also started going back to the office. I met Jay on my lunch breaks. One Friday, when I got back home, my husband was already there waiting for me. I was shocked to see him home. I didn't remember the last time he had come back home before me. I smiled at him and then was going to take a shower when he stopped me. He asked me where I was during my lunch break. I gave him a blank look and wondered how I knew that I had gone somewhere. He told me that he came by my office because he needed my signature on some bank documents. I told him what I had told him the previous time. He seemed like he believed me. He nodded and let me go. Before letting me go, he just whispered that he trusts me. The guilt those words brought to me cannot be described. I was having an affair behind his back, and this guy trusted me. I was so overwhelmed with guilt that I couldn't stop crying in the shower. He hasn't been a good husband to me, but I wasn't a good wife to him either. It felt so wrong to know that he trusted me when I was sleeping with someone else. I knew that I couldn't continue this. I had two options. Either I had to come clean with my husband and end things with him, or to end things with Jay. I knew I had to make a decision, and the thought of losing any of them brought more tears. Jay was a good person. He'd been so good to me. But there was no future for us. I couldn't just leave my son and my husband. I thought it was finally time to end this thing between me and Jay. I had made up my mind and decided that after the weekend was over, I would meet him again. It would be the last time I met him. Turned out that it was too late to make that decision. The next day was a Saturday, and I had plans of staying home with my son. I didn't know what my husband was up to that day. He never used to tell me anything after his promotion. He was mostly always working, even on weekends. My husband didn't go to the office and instead stayed home with us. It was quite a surprise. The day before that also, he was home before me. Something inside told me that something was wrong, but I shrugged it off, thinking it's just my guilt and fear of being caught. My husband sat with me in the living room when our son had gone to the park with Beth. He told me that he needed to talk to me. His tone was so calm and neutral that I didn't think he knew about Jay and me. I was wrong about that. My husband knew. He told me calmly how he's aware of my affair. He said that he had his doubts when I started coming home late, but he got his confirmation after our son was hospitalized. He told me how he used to come by my office at lunchtime and watched me getting in the car with Jay. He showed me the pictures of me and Jay he had taken on his phone. I couldn't lie to him anymore. There wasn't any point anyway. He had pictures of me and Jay kissing each other. I was all over him in those pictures. I took the only option I had. I accepted it. He nodded and asked me how it all started. I told him how everything began. I told him that it all started after he got his promotion and started ignoring me. I told him everything I felt and how Jay made me feel wanted. He gave me a neutral expression throughout as I told him everything. I also told him how I was going to end everything on Monday. He didn't believe me. He laughed and told me that I didn't need to lie to him anymore. He was already aware of my dirty little secret. I told him that I was being honest with that, but he said that he cannot trust anything that came out of my mouth now. He told me that he was working really hard at work so that he could give us the life we wanted. He told me about his plans to take us on an international trip soon. I knew that I wasn't a good husband, but I never cheated on you, he told me harshly, and continued with, I wanted to provide everything to you and our son. I started crying after that. I couldn't hold my tears any longer. It didn't deter him from speaking what he had to say. He told me that he wanted to confront me the previous day itself, but he was giving me a chance to speak the truth by myself. That's why he had told me that he trusted me. He wanted to see my response. I had truly fucked up. He left me in the living room crying. He came back and gave me a glass of water. I was shocked at the gesture, and then saw the envelope he was holding. I knew what was inside that envelope. I knew it was divorce paper, but I wasn't ready for it. I had got them ready after I saw you in the parking lot, he said to me. I wasn't ready to leave him like this, but he was ready, so I hesitantly took the envelope from his hands. Like I had thought, it was divorce papers. I understood that it was my fault we were in that position, but it didn't make the pain any less. I read the papers only to find that he was asking for full custody of our son. I told him that he cannot do it. He told me it was for the good if our son stayed with him instead of me. I told him that I'm never going to sign it with those terms. He told me that it didn't matter what I wanted. He was going to make sure that he took my son with him. He said it's best if I just sign it without any drama and he'll let me meet my son. Otherwise, he'll tell my son that I was cheating on his father and he'll grow up to hate me. I couldn't believe my ears. I didn't know if he was being serious or not. How could he threaten me with something like that? Our son was 5 years old. Knowing something like that would break his heart. I knew that my husband would do anything to get what he wanted. It was possible that he would use my son like this. I had already hurt my son by having an affair. Even if he didn't know that, it was still wrong on my part. I couldn't let him hate me. I tried to reason with my husband that there was no point in taking him away from me. My husband was already so busy with his work. It would be better if he stayed with me. I legit begged him to not do this. All my tears and begging fell on deaf ears. He stood by his decision and told me that I had 2 days to sign these papers. He also added how I would have to end everything with Jay immediately or he'll show our son my picture is with Jay. I had no idea if he was being serious or not. But I couldn't risk my son getting traumatized by seeing his mother like that. I wanted a healthy future for him. I called up Jay after my husband left me in the living room and ended everything with him. Jay knew that my son was the most important to me, so he didn't argue or anything. He just told me to take care and to not hesitate to reach him if I needed something. He didn't know, but I was grateful for him. I called up my lawyer and told them about the custody terms in the divorce papers. He said that it was well within my rights to refuse to agree to those terms and that I can fight for whole custody. I couldn't tell him that my husband was blackmailing me to tell my son about my secret. I ended the call with him shortly. I knew there was no way for me. I had to lose my son either way. Either I refuse to sign this and he'll know about my secret and hate me forever, or I sign these papers and he will stay with his father. I chose the second option and signed the papers. I could stay far from my son, but I couldn't bear seeing hatred in his eyes. At least, he'll have good memories to think about whenever he will remember me. My husband was satisfied with my signature on the paper and told me that he'll give me a week to explain to my son why I'm moving out of the house. He knew it was going to be so hard for me to tell my son that when I didn't even want to leave him. I was sure he was getting his revenge for making me suffer like this. I knew I had to suffer the consequences of my affair, but I never thought that I'd have to lose my son because of it. I didn't ask for divorce earlier because of my son, and today I had to leave him. Telling my son that his mom is going away was the most heartbreaking thing I had to go through. He cried so much the first time I told him that I started crying myself. Even thinking about that makes me want to cry. With a lot of effort, I made him understand that Dad will take care of him and we'll keep meeting very soon. The pain in his eyes made me want to break down then and there. I pretended to be strong for my little guy. I spent the entire week with him trying to savor all the moments. When Friday came around and I dropped him off at school, I told him that I won't be home when he gets back from school. He started crying again, and I hugged him, telling him that I'll meet him very soon. My husband had seen me with my son throughout the week. I had some hope that seeing me so miserable will make him change his mind, but nothing. I had called the movers to move my luggage to my company's apartment. I could only get that in such short notice. While I was getting out of the home, my husband was there. He showed no emotions, neither did I expect him to. He had no emotions for me. He told me that he had filed for the divorce and that his lawyers will be in contact with me for everything after that. I nodded to that. I told him to take care of our son well and that I was sorry for everything. He told me that he'll take care of our son. He said I didn't need to worry about our son anymore. I didn't say anything after that and left the house. It has been more than a month since all this happened. The divorce process is still going on. Our divorce lawyers had told us that since it's uncontested divorce, it will be over soon. I have shifted to the accommodation provided by the company. I didn't have the energy to look for anything else. My ex-husband has allowed me to talk thrice to my son. I miss him so much. It hurts my heart. The only relief is that my son is being treated well. My husband has always been a good father. I knew he'll take care of my son well. My boy told me that his dad comes back home early after work and then plays with him. It was bittersweet to know that, only if he had come home early for me. We wouldn't have been in this situation right now. I know I cannot fault him for my infidelity, but it hurts to know that he couldn't make these changes in his life when I was there. I try to focus on my work now since I have nothing else to do. I never contacted Jay after that call in my home. He hasn't tried to contact me either. I'm grateful for that. I don't think I could continue anything after being away from my son like this. The regret of having an affair is too heavy on my heart. I wish I had never done anything. If I hadn't acted on impulse and didn't start my affair with Jay, I still would be living with my son, and maybe my husband would have started giving me some attention back after some time. I wish I had waited instead of cheating on him like this. Update. It has been 2 months since I left the house. Our divorce has been finalized by the court. When my lawyer asked if I wanted anything from my husband, I straight up refused. I didn't want any of his assets. All I wanted was my son, and since I couldn't have him, anything else didn't interest me a bit. My husband has already moved on. My son told me that he saw Beth, the nanny, coming out of Dad's room in the morning. I was shocked at that. Beth was in her early 30s. Was this easy for him to move on? I thought to myself, but then another thought came to me that I was no one to say this when I had an affair which ended our marriage. It still felt bad, though. I told my son that maybe Beth forgot something and went to get it from Dad. Even though my ex-husband stooped low to use my son against me, I was not him. I wasn't going to play with my son's feelings to take revenge on his father. I was just happy that I could talk to my son whenever I wanted to. Beth used to call me when my son asked her to call Mom, and I was grateful for that. Maybe she felt guilty for sleeping with my ex-husband. I still appreciated her doing this. I even took my son on weekends with me. The little time I get to spend with him has become the highlight of my life. He makes sure to tell me every little detail so I don't miss out on anything. The regret of starting the affair hasn't gone away. It hit especially hard when I had to drop my son back to his father's house, to the same house which used to be mine as well. Update. It has been a year since my last update. My son just turned 6 last month. He has adapted to the changes really well. He stopped crying for me 6 months after I'd left the house. Now he just gives me a smile when I drop him off. It's a mixed feeling to see him smiling like that. It feels a bit better that I'm not the reason my son is crying, but it also hurts as I worry if he misses me or not. Also, my ex-husband has gotten engaged with Beth. They are set to marry within 6 months. Even though I was the one who cheated, it still hurts to see him with someone else. It really did hurt me seeing them together in the house I had built with him. I got to know about their engagement when I went to drop my son back to my ex-husband's place. He was kissing Beth in a very intimate way. I couldn't remember the last time he had kissed me like that. I coughed to indicate my presence. While Beth got shy after seeing me, my ex-husband acted rather pleased that I had seen that. My eyes then fell on the ring in Beth's ring finger. My ex then informed me that he and Beth had gotten engaged and planned on getting married soon. I managed to smile. The look on my ex's face told me that he enjoyed that. I felt hurt. He then kissed her again, and I knew he was taking revenge for me cheating on him. I left after kissing my son on the cheeks. I would like to thank everyone who didn't judge me and offered support and empathy. I don't know you all personally, but it meant a lot to me. Hello, kind people of Reddit. It's hard for me not to feel scared and open as I sit down to write this. Sharing my personal story with people I don't know is scary, but I know deep down that I need to do it. My shoulders have been heavy with this weight for too long. It's time for me to let it go. Now I'm going to tell you my story about how my marriage to a football player fell apart because of my greed. I, a female 28, was married to my husband, male 30, for 2 years. My husband was a rising football player, and I was a housewife. We have no children. So, let me tell you from the beginning. I grew up in a small town in a middle-class family. Actually, it was lower middle class. My father used to drive a school bus while my mother was a stay-at-home mom. I had seen the struggles my parents went through to provide for us. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful for everything they did, but I wanted more. Because of how simple our living situation was, there wasn't much room for extras or niceties. My brothers and I shared a bedroom when we were kids. Our beds were so close to each other that we could feel each other's breath while we slept. The floors creaked and the walls were peeling. No matter how much my mom cleaned, the smell of dampness stayed. Financial limitations ruled our lives, forcing us to make do with what little we had. Hand-me-down clothes, patched-up shoes, and simple meals became the norm. I too wanted the designer bags my friends owned, or the international trips their parents took them to, whereas my parents could only provide us with the basic necessities. I used to dream of things which seemed like they were out of my reach. I wanted to be able to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live in a big house. As I got older, I got more determined to have that life for me. I came to the city looking for a job a few years back where I met my ex-husband. I was working in a bar, and my roommate was invited to some fancy party. She asked me if I wanted to join her. I had never attended a party like this. I decided maybe this party could bring me some opportunities. I remember that party distinctively. It was on a weekend night, and I was happy about it because it meant that I didn't have to take a day off from my work. We made our way to the party. I had borrowed my dress from my friend because I didn't own anything fancy for a party like this with me. Me and my friend were standing near the bar when we spotted a young guy surrounded by a group of girls. He was the highlight of that party. My friend then told me that he is a rising football player in the city and comes from a wealthy family. I kept looking in his direction, thinking how lucky he was to have that kind of life. When my friend saw me staring at him, she told me I should go and introduce myself. It was part of networking and all. I thought that something worse could already happen to me. I made my way to him and introduced myself. Usually famous people were snobby, but he wasn't. He was genuine and kind. I liked talking to him. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After some time, I excused myself, but we exchanged numbers. I didn't really expect anything except that maybe he would refer to me as someone who needed an employee. He surprised me when he texted me a few days later. He asked me how I was doing and if I would like to meet him for a drink. I couldn't stop smiling at his text and then replied, yes. We met in a very fancy restaurant. I would have felt totally out of place, but he made me comfortable and made sure that I had a good night. That's how we started dating. Dating him completely changed my life. I felt like I was living in some Disney movie or shit. He would give me such expensive gifts. I started owning brands I didn't even know existed. My friends started getting jealous of me. I loved it. It was the first time someone was jealous of me. It wasn't like he was completely flawless. He had his flaws. Sometimes he would disappear for days and then come back like nothing had happened. I asked him 2 or 3 times, but when it seemed like he was getting angry over it, I used to drop it. I didn't want to upset him. He was my ticket to the dreams I had always dreamt since I was a child. He could give me all the luxuries and vacations I wanted, and that too, without working for it. I just had to keep him happy. I did everything possible to keep him happy. I used to cook him meals, everything and anything he asked for. I made sure I did it. After a while of dating, we went on a vacation. I didn't have to pay a penny for it. It was on this trip that my now ex-husband asked me to marry him. I was over the moon. Everything he owned would have belonged to me legally after we got married. I did like him, but I wasn't going to marry someone just because of that and then suffer my whole life. I needed assurance that I was going to have a good life. I wanted an affluent life. I didn't want my children to suffer the way I did. Looking back now, I realized that my infatuation with him was more about the lifestyle he could provide me with than actual love. I ignored the warning signs and focused on the fantasy in front of me. We started the wedding preparations and my fiancé insisted on paying for everything. I was happy because I didn't have the money anyway. He told me to go all out. He said he wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams. Everything went really well. We got married in a lavish wedding. My life was nothing less than a fairy tale. I was living my dream. Little did I know, it was just the beginning of a tumultuous roller coaster ride. The first year of my marriage was nothing less than a scene out of a romance movie. My ex-husband used to pamper me so much. Everything I wanted, I got. One time I was scrolling on my phone and came across a designer dress which wasn't out in the stores yet. I showed the dress to him and asked him, "Isn't it pretty?" He asked me if I wanted it. I shrugged and said, "Why not?" 2 days later, the dress was delivered to me with a note from the designer itself. I literally felt like a queen. I felt like God was compensating for all the years of my childhood when I couldn't get anything. My husband was giving me everything there was. In our friends group, my wedding ring had the biggest rock. All the ladies would look at me with envy, and I cherished every second of it. My husband still used to disappear sometimes. He used to come home so late that it was almost morning. But I wasn't very worried about it. I just thought he must be partying with his friends or something. That sort of thing was common with players. I used to stay at home decorating my bungalow or go shopping with his credit card. I had ways to keep myself busy. I had more than most people did, and I enjoyed every bit of it. I had asked my husband to take me on a vacation. He agreed and told me we could go anywhere I wanted. I spent a week researching the perfect holiday destination for us and finally decided on Greece. I always wanted to go there since I was a child, but never had the money to go. The opportunity to go there was finally here. We decided on a 7-day holiday. I had booked the 5-star resorts and everything in Santorini. The trip was fantastic. We did wine tours. We did traditional sightseeing. Just when I didn't think I could be happier, my then husband surprised me with a cruise trip. I was really on top of the world, not knowing that I was going to hit the rock bottom real soon. The trip is my last happy trip with my husband. It was the last trip, in fact. Everything changed after that trip. We came back from the trip, and after a few weeks, my husband's behavior started to change. I didn't know what was wrong with him. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was worried for the next season. It made sense to me, so I let it go. He started coming home late more frequently than before. He was always out and never at home. We stopped spending time together. He also stopped giving me gifts. I felt really bad when that happened. Before the trip, he made sure to get me something once a week. But 2 months had passed, and he didn't mention anything. One day when I was in the kitchen cooking us lunch, he came and kissed me. I was surprised because we had stopped being affectionate with each other. He waited for a few moments and then asked me if he could borrow his credit card, as he had lost his and the new card was coming after someday. I loved that credit card. I could shop as much as I wanted with it, but I still nodded and then went to him and gave him his card. He kissed me on the cheeks again and then left the house. That was the first time he had asked for it, and I felt so upset that I didn't have the card with me anymore. Days passed like this, and every day I kept hoping that I would get my card back, but there were no signs that he was going to return it. I didn't want to ask for it because that would have seemed like I was only concerned about the money. My husband was never at home at that time. He would always tell me that something or the other came up and that he had to stay out. I started doubting that something was wrong. There were too many things to ignore at this point. My husband was always drunk. He would stay out for hours, and he didn't even talk to me. Plus, he had taken away my credit card. There were too many signs. I decided to find out the reason behind my husband's strange behavior. I called up one of our mutual friends and asked him if he knew why my husband was acting differently. He shrugged and told me he didn't know either. My husband hasn't hung out with him for quite long. I thanked him and ended the call. I was trying to figure out what could tell me the reason behind my husband's behavior. I thought of everything I could do. I even thought of hiring a private detective behind him to know the truth. I didn't want to spend money like that. I thought of other ways. One day when my husband was sleeping, I took his phone silently and took it to the washroom. He hadn't changed his password, thankfully. I checked his Instagram to see if he's in someone's DM, but found nothing. I also looked for any apps like Tinder and all, but again, nada. I was getting tired. I was sure his mind was somewhere else. I just had to find out where it was. I didn't have to wait a lot to know the truth. I found it out when I was least expecting it, and it was my nightmare. One day when I was bored at home, I thought of doing some online shopping. My laptop was discharged, so I took my husband's laptop, which was lying on the table in the living room. I opened the laptop and started browsing at Zara. I didn't find anything I liked, so I closed it. I was just about to shut off the laptop when I thought of clearing the history. My husband didn't like it when I used his laptop or phone. I opened the history and saw that my husband had last opened his internet banking website. Curiosity got the control of me, and I opened the website. His account was already logged in, thankfully. What I saw next shocked the fuck out of me. My husband's bank balance was in the negative. I froze at the spot, not understanding what was happening. How was this even possible, I thought. I thought there must be some mistake or some technical glitch. I refused to believe that this was the truth. I opened his account statement and checked where all his money went. Another shock came through me when I saw that large chunks of money were transferred to casinos. There were other random names that I wasn't aware of. Why would he give money to people in casinos, and that too in millions? It was a huge amount, even for him. I needed an explanation from him. Was he lending these people money? So many questions clouded my brain at that moment of time. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him, but got no response. My anger increased as time passed by. Finally, the night came and my husband came back home. I didn't wait any second longer then. I immediately asked where all the money went. He looked confused for a minute, but then his eyes fell on the laptop in the couch, and understanding was drawn on him. He knew how I knew. He got angry and told me that he had told me to stay away from his things and that I should stay within my limit. That angered me even more. I went up to him and told him to cut the bullshit and tell me honestly where all the money was. Till that point, I still had hope that he would give me some logical explanation about whether we actually still have the money. I was waiting for him to tell me that. I didn't expect to hear what he told me. He told me that all our money was gone. He was on the verge of going bankrupt. I asked myself how it all happened. He then collapsed on the couch and started rubbing his eyes. He then told me everything that was happening for the last few months. He said that he was hanging out with a few of his friends at a party where someone made a bet. My husband won that bet and some money with it. He started going to casinos with those men and used to bet a lot of money, thinking he would win so much money there. In the beginning, he used to win, so he kept playing. Then he started to lose. He didn't give up then. He thought if he kept playing, he would win back the money he had lost. This wasn't just a day or two. He did this for months, and now we were broke. I couldn't believe it. All my dreams about living a luxury life broke just because my husband was a stupid man and a gambler. That too, a bad one. I felt like slapping him or doing something to him to make him realize what he had done to me. I couldn't look at his face any longer, so I left the living room and went to my bedroom and locked the door. I needed space for him. He got the hint and didn't try to come closer to me. I was in my bed when I heard the sound of the engine and him driving off. I was filled with rage because of his actions. All my dreams, everything I wanted in life was gone in a moment because of him. I don't. I've been so angry in my life like I was at that moment. I didn't have money in my childhood, but that was different. I came from a middle-class family. This time, I was going broke because my husband was a stupid man. I was consumed with rage that I didn't even think anything. I just texted George, his personal trainer. George had been my husband's personal trainer for a very long time. He was his trainer from even before we started dating. When I started dating my ex-husband, he introduced me to George one day. George was good-looking. He seemed extra friendly to me, quite flirtatious. I just laughed then, but my husband had noticed it too. After George left the house that day, he told me that he didn't like him near me. I made it my mantra to stay away from him from that day onwards. I was hell-bent on doing everything that my boyfriend liked. I wanted him to consider me as his wife, and I did everything for that. Whereas my husband couldn't even take care of the money that was supposed to take us and our future children. I was done with doing what he wanted. I wanted to do something wrong, something bad to him. What could be worse than his wife sleeping with his personal trainer behind his back? I thought of George first because I knew how much it was going to hurt my husband that his wife went to George. Him and George were always in some kind of competition, and my husband loved to win. I was going to make him lose. Another reason for choosing George was that I knew it wouldn't be very difficult to convince me. He would be ready for it as soon as I asked him. I also had a hope that maybe George would save me from getting broke. Just as I expected, his reply came almost immediately. I had texted him if he could meet me. He replied telling me sure and asking me where I want to meet. I thought about it for a moment. I didn't want to meet at home because my husband could come home anytime. I thought of a hotel on the outskirts of the city. Noon we know visited there, so there were slim to zero chances that someone we knew could see me there. I texted him the location and told him to meet me there the next day. I had told him that we'll meet at the restaurant of the hotel. His text came telling me that he'll be there waiting for me. The next day, I got dressed in a dress which showed all my curves and a lot of cleavage. I needed to look hot if I wanted to achieve what I had in mind. I did subtle makeup with bold, pouty lips. I didn't even need to make any excuse to go and meet George because my husband wasn't even at home. He hadn't come home since the previous night after he told me all about gambling. I didn't care either. It was best if there was as much distance as possible at that time. I reached the restaurant on time, but I didn't go inside immediately. I waited for a few minutes. I didn't want to appear too interested in this. I had to have the upper hand with George. I wanted him to pursue me. One thing I had learned about men was that they didn't like anything they got too easily. I wasn't a fool to be one of those things. As I made my way to George, he looked up, and when he saw me, he smiled. He also checked out with an appreciating gaze. I was enjoying all of it. We settled down and started talking. It was a normal conversation. The normal, "What's up? How have you been?" We got comfortable with each other quite soon. After some time, George asked me how my husband was doing. He told me he heard somewhere that my husband made some financial decisions. I thought about how everyone knew about it except me. I looked at George. It was clear he knew about the gambling. He was just being subtle about it. I took that opportunity and played my victim card. I got emotional as I told him how it feels like everything is lost for me now. He looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. I lied to him about how it's not even the money. What hurts me the most is how I have lost my husband now. In the back of my mind, I was calculating that if the news is spread among people, that means that we are at the end of the rope only. I needed to find a way out very quickly. I smiled at George, hoping that he would be my way out. After a few drinks, we got the bill and George paid for it. I told him that I think I'm going to stay in the hotel only for the night as I don't want to go home. He nodded in understanding and then told me that he will drop me to my room. We walked to my room together after talking to the receptionist. George told me good night and to call him if I needed something. I nodded at him and muttered a thanks. He was just about to leave when I kissed his cheeks. He looked at me in confusion just for a second, and before I could say anything, he entered the room and kissed me back. We didn't stop at just kissing. We did more, and finally slept with each other. I felt odd satisfaction that night. My husband broke all my dreams, and I broke his pride. He liked to show off to George that he had me. It wasn't true now. I slept at night comfortably. I had a way to still make my dreams come true. The next morning when I woke up, George was still asleep. I got up and went to the window. I was looking at the view when George came from behind me and hugged me. He wished me good morning and kissed me. We had coffee together, and it was finally time to go back home. Before we left, George asked me directly if this was a one-time thing or if I'd like to continue this. I smiled at him and told him that I would like to see more of him. He seemed happy. I came back to an empty home. My husband still hadn't come back home. The bed was just like I had left it. I changed my clothes and switched on my laptop. I started researching George. I wanted to know if he had the means to make my dream come true or not. To my surprise, a happy one, he did have the means. He was not just a personal trainer to my husband. He was also a landlord. He owned many shops in the city which were in the prime area. He also had many investments which gave him good returns. I was really happy with what I had found. This was all I wanted. I was not going to let my husband's stupid decisions ruin things I wanted for years. I thought that I wasn't going to waste my prime years with my husband struggling again. I deserved better, and George was going to provide that for me. My affair with George continued. I didn't text him first after the night. I waited patiently for him to text me back. I waited for the whole night just looking for his texts and got really disappointed when they didn't come. My husband had come back home at that time for a short duration. We both didn't talk to each other. Neither he did try nor did I make an attempt. He simply came, took a shower, and then left after some time. This home had become a hotel for him. I wasn't complaining though. I thought the more we stayed away from each other, the better it was. However, he finally texted me after a week. I was over the moon. He told me he got caught up with some work and that's why he couldn't reach out to me earlier. I told him it was all cool. He then asked me if I would like to meet him again. I replied after some time, even though I had seen the text instantly. I agreed to meet him. He texted me the location and the time we were supposed to meet. I got ready and then went to meet him. He was already waiting for me. He smiled at me like he was happy to see me there. We went to the suite he had booked for us. We spent the whole night together. In the morning, I told him that I should go home, but he insisted on staying longer. I was more than happy with listening to that. We spent the whole day with each other. My affair with George continued for around a month. Sometimes my husband would be home and I couldn't meet him. George used to get upset with that. One day he told me that I should divorce my husband. He told me that he would take care of me. He didn't like to meet me secretively. He said that I shouldn't waste my time with a loser like my husband. George also told me that the health of my husband wasn't looking very good, and it seemed like he was not going to do well in the football season that was coming up. My husband was in his late 20s at that time. He was just about to turn 30. I calculated that there wasn't much hope for him in football anyway. All the money he had made was already gone. Our home was going to get seized too if he didn't return the money to the bank. I didn't think his family was going to help him out either. I told George that I was thinking about it. He told me that he was there for me and knew good lawyers as well. I took George's help and got the divorce paper ready from the lawyer he had told me about. The papers were served to my husband. When I came back home after meeting George, I found my ex-husband on the couch. His eyes were red. He looked so angry. I saw the envelope in his hand and knew that the divorce papers had made him this angry. I didn't say anything to him and went to the kitchen. He followed me to the kitchen and asked me what the fuck was I doing. I told him I didn't know what he meant and tried to go to the bedroom. He didn't let me go. He held my wrist tightly and asked me what was wrong with me and all. When I didn't say anything to him, he got even more upset and started breaking things from the counter. I told him that I don't want to do anything with him and the mess he had made. I texted George to pick me up from my house. When George entered the house, my husband's anger intensified. He started cursing loudly and asked what George was doing here. I went to George, kissed him in front of my husband quite passionately, and told him that I had called him here. My husband got speechless after what we saw. George smirked at him. I told him to sign the papers. I still remember how heartbroken he looked. I almost felt bad for him, but the calculating side of me overpowered me, and I walked away. He signed the papers shortly. I had moved in with George. Our divorce process didn't take much time. I got another surprise after our divorce was finalized. Just after our divorce, the football season was on. I had expected that this would be my husband's last season, and that he was going to perform really bad. But to my and everyone's surprise, he performed excellently well. He made the most money in that season. I suddenly started feeling bad for what I had done with him. He made a mistake, but he also had the capacity to correct his mistakes. With the money he was making, he could easily repay the loan that was on him in a very short time. I started regretting everything that I did with him. George had a stable life, but he didn't treat me like my ex-husband did. If I asked him for a vacation, he would instead tell me that we could spend that money on buying a property. That property would give us rent, whereas vacation will be a waste of money. His money was of no use to me. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't use it. He controlled his money to every last buck. If I needed something, he used to ask me how much it cost. If something cost around $59, then he would give $59 only. He also had a habit of asking for bills. Living with George was like I was back in my childhood. Except this time, it was worse because I could see the money but not touch it. I soon realized the grave mistake I had made by leaving my husband when he needed me. I should have been there for him, but I gave him more troubles and heartache. I wanted to go back to him, but I knew he wouldn't take me back after that show. I had put up with George in the living room. I got to know that he had stopped gambling for good and was doing a lot of work to get his life on track. His family had also helped him a lot. It wasn't much of a big deal to them. They were wealthy people. When I got my divorce, my husband's financial condition was really bad, and therefore he didn't have to give me anything. But now he was getting everything back in his life. The money, and after the last season he played really well, he was getting his fame back as well. Whereas I had lost everything. I lost my husband and my home. The guy who was supposed to give me everything turned out to be useless as well. Even though I was always calculating, all my calculations resulted in me getting nothing. I finally got tired of chasing my dreams and decided it was best to just forget it. There wasn't much for me in the city. Everyone in the football community hated me. I was the woman who had left her husband in his bad times and cheated on him, that too with his personal trainer. I didn't blame them for their hatred for me. They were right only. I just couldn't bear all that anymore. I ended my relationship with George. He wasn't very upset about it. It seemed like he wanted that as well. I left the city and went back to my childhood town. Before going back, I thought of meeting my ex-husband once, just to tell him goodbye. I went to the house which used to be mine. He opened the door, and as soon as he saw me, his face turned red from anger. He was about to shut the door on my face when I told him to just listen to me once. I begged him and he stopped. I told him that I was sorry for everything I had done. He laughed at my apology. He told me that I had done him a favor by leaving him and showing him my true colors. He said if I hadn't shown him who I really was, he never would have thought that I was such an evil person. I listened to him because his anger was justified. I told him that I was leaving the city and going back to my town. He mocked me how George couldn't keep me satisfied. When I went to his house, I had a bit of hope. I had hoped that maybe he would see me and forgive me, but he was still angry with me. He looked at me like he hated me. I started crying, hoping that maybe that will soften him up a bit. He just told me with plain hatred how it was good that I was leaving the city because he never wanted to see my face again. I told him goodbye and left his house in tears. All the hope I had inside of me was finally dead. I took the bus and went to my town. The aftermath of what I had done followed me even back there. Everyone in the town somehow knew what I did in the city, and everywhere I went, I was given judgy looks. I finally made peace with the fact that what's done was done. I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wished for it. I started living in a small apartment because even my parents felt ashamed to be seen with me. The apartment was the size of the walk-in closet I had in my big house. I started taking local jobs. Whoever needed an assistant, I was up for it. It took me time to get used to it. I finally started working as a hairdresser, and that job stuck with me. It has been almost a year since I moved into my town. I feel guilty for a lot of things I have done. But the one action that I regret every day is what I did with my ex-husband. He didn't deserve that. The way I ruthlessly cheated on him was really low. If I could go back in time, I would never go to that hotel or text George. Like I said in the beginning, it is hard for me to share the worst part of me with strangers on the internet. But I felt like I needed to share this with someone. I don't have any friends or anyone like that with whom I can openly share why I did what I did. The best bet seemed this. It definitely feels better now that everything is in the open. I just hope that the guilt and regret goes away one day as well. The burden of it feels too heavy. Update. Thank you for all the comments and likes. When I wrote this post, I didn't expect that it would be this number of people. I'm thankful to all you who read my story. Also, to the people who are calling me a gold digger and names, I won't defend myself to you. You are somewhat right. I have always kept money as my priority rather than love. I do realize that the reason why my romantic relationship didn't work out with my ex-husband or with George was that I prioritized money over love. I only chose them because they had money. Anyways, thanks again to all of you for listening to my story and sharing your opinions.